If you're in the mood for a TurboGrafx-16-like action platformer with Metroidvania elements, then I have just the game for you. Necrolepsy is a fun throwback game with plenty of fun anime influences, a charming cast, fun arcade-like gameplay, and an amazing art style. Necrolepsy follows the story of Lyra, a bounty hunter who has been inflicted with a curse known as Necrolepsy. Basically, a group of colorful necromancers put the infliction onto her, and now Lyra suffers horrific nightmares. To combat the terrors of self-inflicted sleep deprivation, Lyra, donned in a prickly fishnet set of armor, must set out to put a stop to the necromancers one by one to put an end to the curse and return her sleeping schedule, along with her dreams, back to normal. I like the short, sweet, fantastical, and silly story and offer. It's a fun twist to the story of having to rid oneself of a curse. Thankfully, to go along with such a charming tale is a cast of our two charming heroes and even some quirky villains. The writing for everyone, and even the tutorials, was spot on. It was mostly self-referential goofs, but they felt like they fit in universe, even though some of them were teasing game conventions and other such things. Lyra was a positive and energetic heroine who I loved quite dearly. Her positivity and optimism, like Bart her best friend and potential love interest says, is infectious. Lyra always has a quip or one-liner at hand, and always did her best despite her current conditions. Bart was a great character to have play off Lyra, as he genuinely felt like her friend. Along with giving off fun banter to things Lyra says, Bart also acts as the in-game store, but we will talk about that when we get to that part of the gameplay department. I also can't forget about Catherine, the chicken, who was of course a chicken. The necromancers, along with the final boss, all had their own devilishly fun and sinister personalities that comedically butted heads with Lyra's plans to stop them. They each vary differently in attitude and appearance, and were all incredibly snarky. They also make one of the only in-game anime references, which I found really fun. The gameplay was very much a time machine back to great hack and slash platformers on the more powerful consoles of the 16 and 32-bit generation. You'll be running around cutting up enemies with your slowly improving base arsenal, fighting your way through 4 maze-like levels, all while finding secret power-ups. Armed at first with your stun crossbow and sword, you make your way through each dungeon, beating up every ghoul in your way, fighting sub-bosses every now and then before fighting the main boss of the area. It's all very simple, but it follows the adage of, if it ain't broke, it doesn't need fixing. As you progress your way through the levels, naturally you'll get more attack variations and means of traversing the area and obstacles that might have been in your path. Everything is very straightforward, and even the secrets you'll want to find are easy enough to find as long as you're looking for them. I never got lost outside of once in one of the main dungeons, and I beat the game without dying once. That's not to say I didn't have a few moments where I got close to dying, however. The game is just very fair with how most of the enemies and challenges are handled. That isn't to say the game isn't hard, however, because if you found the first normal mode too hard, there are a bunch of extra harder difficulty modes after you beat the game the first time. Thankfully, if you are having trouble finding your way around the dungeon at any time, or just need to fast travel, you can do so by either buying an item that allows you to fast travel back to save statues, or using the save statues themselves with the teleportation crystals. While the map is a bit hard to read while teleporting, this is the easiest way to get around the map sans backtracking. Speaking of save rooms, these are the only way you're able to heal. They are usually found right before boss battles and will recharge your health completely, and your sleep meter as well. Ah yes, your sleep meter. It's constantly counting down, and if it hits 0, the world around Lyra will become a nightmarish one of utter spooks. Best to find a bed before that happens. There is a difficulty mode that's basically Dante Must Die mode, where if Nightmare mode activates once, you die immediately. It's a pretty cool challenge mode. Items can either be bought from Bart's store if you choose to return there after or even during missions, or of course if you find secrets while exploring. You get gold for killing enemies, and I really like the fact that this played into Lyra getting bounties for beating bosses, as it played into her profession of being a bounty hunter. A very nice improvement I was happy to see in an update was now once you purchased something in Bart's store, it was now actually highlighted yellow to indicate you already had bought it. This was nice since now I didn't have to worry about if I could buy it again or not. Originally it was the same color as if it wasn't purchased, so this was a really nice quality life improvement. Combat is pretty darn fluid and fun. It starts off incredibly basic, and while it never gets too complicated for its own good, it does get some depth with how new weapons can play into combat. Slowly but surely, you get more attacks and ways to maneuver, and these all become second nature quite quickly due to the fluid and thankfully basic enough controls. One funny thing to me is the combat oddly reminded me of, once again, Devil May Cry, with the fact that you could air hike enemies repeatedly, along with the fact that you upgrade your base sword to have different functions. Each of the enemies and bosses by extension were usually quite similar, with some bosses feeling a bit too copy and pasted. Now that's not to say they weren't visually interesting or fun to fight, outside of the lizards that is, it just felt like some of the bosses had patterns designs that were a bit too close together. The necromancers were all usually varied as boss fights go, and my favorite, even though it was the easiest, was definitely the red necromancer. The final boss was sadly the weakest, only in terms of the fact that it felt like it had slightly wonky hit detection sometimes. Thankfully, for each of the locations, the enemies and their designs fit it quite well. Skeletons in haunted armor and furniture for the spooky manor, elementals for the cave, mutations for the castle labs, and finally vampires and evil spellcasters for the final area of the game. Again, the art style was very reminiscent of what you might find on a TurboGrafx 16, and while the art definitely had that retro feel, it still felt properly modern and original. It wasn't trying too hard to seem like one thing or another that you may have seen in the past. It felt like its own thing. The levels and designs are all pretty darn beautiful and quite unique and visually interesting to look at. Lyra reminded me of Lena Inverse from Slayers, but only in spunky attitude and passing design. Not only was her design fun, but all the goofy faces she made always got a good laugh out of me. Bart was the right kind of basic and generic, and then there were the enemies and the necromancers themselves. The enemies all looked completely different no matter where you were, and the necromancers, for characters all wearing robes and hoods, all had distinct visual personality that fit each of their moods. The dungeons were all really varied, and the opening before heading into each of the levels properly was always nice to look at, with some really cool scrolling effects. I liked the visual changes between reality and the nightmare realm, as sometimes things got quite gruesome or legit spooky, especially in the first level. The music was all really darn pleasing to hear, and the final tracks leading up to the final boss were fantastically heavy metal inspired. All the soundtrack was great, and while the boss music was the same thing each time, I never really minded. Some of these tracks, again, especially the last few, are definitely something I could actually see myself listening to outside the game. And with all that said, I just have to say that Necrolepsy really is a great time. It's a tad on the short side, clocking in at 2 hours for the first time on normal, but thankfully there are different difficulty modes and even some bonus modes like a boss rush mode and a beach volleyball mode. We're not going to talk about that. The game doesn't really have any problems outside of the short length for your first playthrough, since I managed to do it in that time and 100% the game without dying, but other than that, the game is a great time and absolutely worth a play if this is your type of game. It's more so an action platformer, but I think Metroidvania fans will still have a good time trying to find all the upgrades that you can get. It's smooth, funny, and all around charming, and definitely worth a playthrough. A huge thank you to the dev of the game, Stolkin, for sending me a review copy of the game, and actually listening to some of my comments I sent earlier about the game, because a few of the problems I did have with the game ended up getting patched up quickly. His game's Twitter account will be linked in the description below. As always, if you want to help support the channel, please consider sharing the video with a friend or checking out my Patreon linked in the description below. If you have any comments, questions, or recommendations, leave them down below as I read and reply to everything. Until next time, this is Thierry Williamson signing off until the next video. See ya guys!